Hello and welcome to Gutenberg for Content Creators. This is an intermediate WordPress workshop. Um, okay, and it looks like things are streaming okay. So my name is Brian DeConick, and I work with OIT's Design and Web Services group. You may know us from our work around campus, or you may not. That's okay too. As you can obviously see, this is a YouTube live presentation, which means we are a little bit at the mercy of how YouTube streams things for us. So if we run into any technical difficulties, I just ask that you be patient and give me a chance to sort of regroup and restart the broadcast. Usually that doesn't happen, but we have had that happen once or twice where the stream just cut out on us. You should see in the excuse me, you should see in the description beneath the video a link to a Q&A document. So anybody on campus should be able to access that document. And please feel free to put your questions in there. There's a slight delay between when I see something, when I say something, and then when it gets processed through YouTube and broadcast. So if you ask a question and I just keep talking, I promise I'm not ignoring you. I just haven't seen it or responded to it yet. So just wait a moment. And then I guess the other thing about YouTube Live is that I don't get any real audience feedback. I might make a dumb joke. I'm just going to assume you're going to laugh. If I'm going too fast, or if you need me to go back over something or something like that, please be sure to mention that in the Q&A document. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about Gutenberg and what that means for WordPress. Okay, so on today's agenda, we're going to talk about the what, why, and when of Gutenberg. We're going to spend some time meeting the new editor, and I'm going to highlight a few things that we found in our user testing that you're going to want to keep an eye out for. Then we'll shift gears and talk about what's actually going to happen to your website when you get upgraded to the new editor. Talk about some resources and give you some general words of encouragement. It's a big change. It's a change that I'm actually really excited about, but hopefully, if nothing else, at the end of this presentation, you'll have some idea of what's coming and what it'll look like. So, all right, so let's get started. The what, why, and when of Gutenberg. For the last 12 years, WordPress has been using what it's been calling the visual editor, and now in this new Gutenberg world, um, it's being rebranded as the classic editor. So, classic editor, visual editor, this is something that should look very familiar. If you have been using WordPress in the past, it's looked something like this with maybe a few variations, uh, very similar to, for instance, writing an email in Gmail or something like that. Um, and the classic editor is great. The classic editor is really easy to use when you're building a simple page or writing a simple blog post. It's really dependable and reliable. Like, it works exactly the way you expect it to work. And it's pretty good at WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So those are all the reasons that the classic editor is great. The reasons it's not great are that while it's easy to build simple pages, it's actually really difficult to build complex pages. And I'll show you an example of what I mean by a complex page in a moment. It's also outdated and clunky. So if you think about where the internet was, where websites were 12 years ago versus where they are now, a lot has changed. 12 years ago was before smartphones were in everybody's pocket. 12 years ago, just the technology we were using to build websites was different, and the technology people were using to view and edit content on websites was different. And then also, while it's pretty good at WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get for simple pages, Sometimes what you see is not necessarily what you get, depending on several different factors, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So here's what I mean by it's good at WYSIWYG for a simple page. Over on the left-hand side, we have a screenshot of the editor, the classic editor of an about page for this fictitious Department of Baked Goods at NC State. And you can see from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, everything you put in comes out basically looking the same when it comes out on the other end on the public website. The image placement is the same as where you put it. Depending on how your WordPress theme is written, things may be styled so that you're using the same fonts and the same colors as I am here, things like that. But suppose you want to do something more interesting than just text and an image here and there. So here on the right-hand side, we have a screenshot of a of a more complex page where we have this big banner that has text and an image next to each other and an icon. Um, Further down, we have this two-column layout. Then we have another one of these icons and then a different font, and then a little arrow that when you hover over it, it will scoot to the right. You've probably seen that sort of effect on lots of different NC State websites. Um, I don't know how you do all of this in just the regular classic editor in WordPress. There's not really a button in the classic editor that says, give me an arrow that scoots to the right whenever I hover over the link. It's not really clear how you get from the left-hand side to the right-hand side when you start getting into more interesting websites, more interesting design features, things like that. And so for the last 12 years, WordPress developers like me have been trying to solve this problem in all sorts of different ways. So here I have just sort of a cavalcade of examples of things that we've been doing to try to squeeze more interesting features out of this existing editor. So in the top left-hand corner, there are shortcodes, which you may have seen, where you have this sort of pseudo HTML with these square brackets. Right in the middle is another layer on top of shortcodes called shortcake, which gives you a preview and a form to fill out to generate shortcodes, but it's still basically shortcodes under the hood. Um, Over on the right-hand side, we have uh, what's called an advanced custom field, especially if you're using a website built by University Communications, for instance, or certain outside vendors. This should look very familiar, where you have these sort of modules or content sections that you add, and it's a well-defined form, and then you push the button and it outputs to the live website. And then down in the bottom left-hand corner, this is an example of a free page building plugin, um, where you can do a lot more in terms of layout and styling and things like that, but you completely lose any of the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get feature of the editor. And that's really true for all of these. All of them are taking this really simple and elegant editor, and in order to try to squeeze more life out of it, they are uh, really cutting back on some of the features that make it simple, adding this extra layer of complexity and making it something that requires a lot of training and a lot of explanation for how it goes from what you put into the editor to what comes out on the front end. And so that's what WordPress has been doing for the last 12 years, is coming up with new and interesting ways of working with this classic editor. But the rest of the web has been doing something different. So you may be familiar with some services like Medium, Wix, and Squarespace. These are popular services that give you more web publishing options. They're not nearly as flexible as WordPress is in terms of what we can do as developers, but their user interfaces are really a dramatic departure away from what WordPress has been doing for the last 12 years. And just to highlight a few features that I'm going to come back to later on, in the Medium screenshot there, you'll see that everything's very clean. lots of white space, not a lot of extraneous text. There's what you type, and then there's some icons, and those icons are evocative of whatever it is that you're trying to do with it or insert into the text. On the right-hand side, we have a screenshot from Wix, and you'll notice that with Wix, um, when you highlight text, your formatting options will appear, so making it bold or italicized, changing the font color, things like that. But once you stop highlighting text, if you're just typing, that toolbar will just disappear. So this idea of not everything has to be visible all the time, um, really displaying information or displaying options to content creators based on the context of what they're doing. And then at the bottom with Squarespace, you have this idea in this box that popped up here of content blocks. This idea that there are different kinds of things that you might want to put into a website. You can call them blocks, and a web page, a single web page, is going to be some collection of blocks. Some of it might be text blocks, some might be images. Excuse me, some might be other rich media, things like that. And so uh, this is sort of the direction, these sort of ideas are the direction that the web has been moving while WordPress has been sort of stuck with 12-year-old technology. And so, again, we're not really in a position to consider not using WordPress on campus because there's a lot about WordPress besides the editing experience that makes it a really good fit for what we do at NC State. It's incredibly flexible. We can scale it up to an enterprise level sort of implementation at the university. But these new services like Squarespace and Wix and Medium give content creators control in a way that's really cool with a modern and clean user interface. And there's something that can be learned from that. And so it's not just me that's saying that, it's a lot of people that are saying that in the broader WordPress community. And here is a quote from Matt Mullenweg. He is the sort of the founder of the WordPress project, and he's still one of the lead developers with the project. And in January of 2017, he sort of set out what the goals for the next couple of years of WordPress development would be. And one of the goals was to create a new page and post building experience that makes writing rich posts effortless and has blocks to make it easy to do all the things that I was just talking about before with shortcodes and advanced custom fields and all these extra things. And so that's what brings us to where we are today. That's Gutenberg is the new editor. It is the right now it's a sort of beta testing plugin that we can add to a website and give you a sort of an early glimpse at what the new editor looks like. But starting with WordPress version 5.0, it will be the default editor. Just in case you're wondering, right now WordPress is at version 4.9.8. So 5.0 is coming soon, but we don't know exactly when. They've been talking about Gutenberg for a while. There was a little while where we thought it would be launched last April. Um, that didn't happen, obviously, and we're still using the classic editor by default. But it should be coming, if not sometime this fall, very early 2019. So it's good that you're in this class now because you are getting an early look. You may even have an opportunity to install Gutenberg on your website and sort of embrace the future a little bit early. Um, we've been running a lot of these workshops over the last several months just to try to prepare campus because it is sort of a big change, as you're about to see. So, one quick disclaimer before we start to actually see the editor. Gutenberg is an evolving tool. That means that it's getting better for the most part. But it also means that some of the things you see in the screenshots today and when you're getting hands-on experience in a little bit, some of those things may not be implemented exactly the way you see them today. They may not be implemented exactly that way when your website upgrades to Gutenberg or when WordPress 5.0 is released. Um, and so also everybody on campus has a slightly different WordPress installation or a slightly different WordPress experience. Um, there may be some things that you don't see when you're getting hands-on experience today that you're used to seeing. There may be some things that will be available to you later on that aren't now. So just sort of bear in mind that no YouTube Live workshop is going to be able to cover every possible situation. So if you have any questions, if there's something that you're looking for and you're like, is this just something specific to my website, or is this something that's gone in the new editor, things like that, just feel free to post those questions in the Q&A document, or send me a question afterwards, after the class is over. So let's meet the new editor. First, I just want to tell you that most of WordPress is not changing. So when I say Gutenberg is the new editor, that means that adding media files, managing comments, if you have comments turned on, choosing themes and plugins, if that's something you have the power to do on your website, or managing users, things like that, none of that is changing. All that's going to be changing will be the posts, the pages, and then if your website supports other content types, things like people, or maybe like documents or calendars, events, things like that, those may also be changing with the new editor. So this is the new editor. This is Gutenberg. You'll notice that very much like the screenshots of the other products that I showed you, it's a very clean, very open interface. There isn't a lot of extraneous text. It's big on white space. The main focus is what you're typing. There are a few buttons and things like that that I'm going to highlight as we go. So let's start digging in. So the first time you use Gutenberg, you're going to see these tips pop up. You've got this little blue dot that will glow, or sort of a gentle strobe effect next to the thing that it's highlighting. So here it's highlighting this little block inserter tool that I'll talk about in a little bit. You can turn tips off, and then if you decide you need them afterwards, you can turn them back on again. And actually, as developers, we're able to add additional tips to the editor. So as we create more tools for the new editor, we'll be able to give you tips in context just like this, which I think is really cool. That's a way of training and communicating with users that we haven't had in the past. So in Gutenberg, everything is a block. So this gets back to this sort of nebulous block term that Matt Mullenweg used and that other services like Squarespace use. The idea is that anything that you put into the editor is a something, some sort of piece that can be moved around, that can be interacted with in a couple of different ways. So a block is sort of the fundamental unit of your content now. Um, so in practice, that doesn't have to mean very much. As you write your paragraphs, you can just start typing and keep typing, and you won't really see much of the block interface itself. You're just going to see text on the screen as you type. But every time you create a new paragraph, every time you create a heading or a list or something like that, all of these things are turned into separate blocks that the editor can see and recognize as different pieces, and then we can do things with that. So anything you want to add to a post or a page is going to be added as a block. And that means basically anything. So the sky is the limit in terms of what is theoretically possible. I'll get into some detailed examples as we go, but it's not just text, it's also going to be images or videos, buttons, dynamic content, interactive content with your users, things like that. This plus button that you saw just a moment ago is called the block inserter. Um, when you push the plus button, it opens up this little box that lets you choose which block you'd like to add to the page. If you don't use the block inserter, if you're just typing and you hit enter um, and then you start typing again, that will automatically insert a new paragraph block. So you don't have, if you're just typing text, you don't have to keep going back up to the plus button and choosing paragraph over and over and over again. Um, but if you'd like to add something else, like an image or a video or something like that, this is where you'll go to select that block. This little plus button is always present in the top left-hand corner of the editor, but it will occasionally show up in other places. Again, Gutenberg is trying to be context aware, so if it seems like it's a good time for you to have that plus button, it will try to give you that plus button as an option. Um, every time you click on the plus button, the interface should basically be the same thing. You should always have the same blocks to choose from. You should always have that search bar at the top of the block inserter. So if you're not quite sure what the block is called, but you have a rough idea of what you're looking for, you can type something in there. Or if you know what it's called, but you just don't want to cycle through finding all of the blocks that are available, you can type that into the search tool. Blocks can sometimes be nested inside of other blocks that support nesting. So the main example of that is a new block called columns, which gives you the option of um, inserting content into a multi-column layout. So you can have like a 2x2 or a three, or rather a 2-column across layout or a 3-column across layout. Anything up, I think 6 is the maximum that the editor allows right now. This is a very new feature and it takes a little getting used to, but it's got a ton of potential. And in some of the projects I've been working on lately, I've used it a lot to a lot of success, recreating some layouts and some options that otherwise would have taken a lot more coding on the part of a developer. Each block has customization options and can be customized individually. And what customization options are available depend on what type of block that it is. So here we have a paragraph block, um, and when the paragraph block is being worked on, you're typing in it. I'm going to say that, so the technical term for that is when the block is in focus. When a block is in focus, you'll see this gray line going, this gray rectangle around the block. And then across the top, you'll have this little toolbar that gives you some of the formatting options that are available for the block. And then at the right-hand side of the toolbar, you have these 3 vertical dots that if you click that, it'll open up a menu, as you can see here, giving you more options. And actually, if you click on the top option right there, Show Block Settings, that will open up a sidebar to the right-hand side, which we'll see in a moment, that gives you even more options for customizing the block. Don't worry too much about what the options are that you see here. We're going to get into some of the specifics as we go. The important thing to know is that every block is going to have slightly different options depending on what type of block it is, and that these are the places to look for those options in the toolbar across the top of the block, in the little three dot button that opens up the menu right there, and then off to the right hand sidebar, as we'll see right now. Nope, forgot this slide. Okay, so all blocks have options in their block menu, as I was saying. Um, Blocks also have the option to transform into other blocks. And this is actually something that I should have mentioned that I completely forgot about. Um, so to the left-hand side, I'll go back for a moment. Um, so in this toolbar here, you see all the way to the left of the toolbar is an icon that represents the block type. So this is a paragraph icon for the paragraph block type. If there are transformations available, if you click on that icon right there, that will open the transformation menu, which gives you the other blocks that this can be transformed into. So for instance, if you start typing text as a paragraph and you realize this should really be a bulleted list, then you can, rather than have to delete everything and start over from scratch, you can just go to the transformation tool and go to and select the list block, and what you've typed so far for that block will be automatically turned into a list for you. Okay, so now here's the right-hand sidebar that I was talking about. So over to the right, you have, so I guess I'll start on the left. On the left-hand side, you can see this paragraph is still in focus. It has the same toolbar across the top. It has these three dots if you want to open up that menu. And then over to the right-hand side, we have the sidebar. The sidebar has a few things in it. First, we have a the name of the block, paragraph, and a short description of the block. That description will be really helpful for certain blocks where maybe you'll open it up and you won't really know what's this supposed to do. And then beneath that, you have several different options. And again, these options depend on what kind of block you're working with. So for the paragraph block, you can change the text size. You can add a drop cap, which means you can make the first letter of the paragraph bigger. Um, you can change the color, either the background color of the paragraph or the text color of the paragraph, and then a few extra things like adding CSS classes in the advanced options if that's something you're comfortable with or familiar with. So the options, as I've said, the options and the transformations will depend on which block you've selected. So here, these are the options and transformations that are available for an image block, and these look very different than the options that were available for the paragraph block just a moment ago. In the block inserter tool, blocks are organized into different sections, and that first section, most used, is going to be is going to change based on what blocks you're using. So if you're only ever writing basic text paragraphs, that's going to be the number one most used block. If you're doing lots of interesting layouts with multiple columns and things like that, you'll start to see blocks like the columns block showing up in the most used section. The embed section is also worth mentioning. Excuse me. So in the embed section, you have all the things that WordPress has allowed you to embed into a page before, but hasn't always told you you can. So one of the questions that we get as a support team for the university sometimes is people asking, how do I add a YouTube video to my page? And in WordPress, in the classic editor, that's very easy. You can just take the YouTube URL and paste it into the editor, and WordPress will process that for you. But there's nothing on the screen that tells you that you can do that. It's just sort of a feature you have to know about. Um, in this new sort of blocky future, in the embed section, now it's explicitly telling you you can add a YouTube video or a Facebook page or a SoundCloud link, something like that. You can select that YouTube block and it will tell you exactly what it's looking for. That it's looking for the URL for the YouTube video as opposed to the embed code that YouTube gives you, things like that. So in a lot of ways, this is a big improvement. It's a lot clearer to users, to content creators, what their options are and what they can do. There's also this idea of reusable blocks. Um, so the reusable blocks section in your block inserter is hidden until you create a reusable block, and creating one is very easy. You create the block that you want to reuse in other places, and then you click on those three dots, that three-dot menu for that block, and then there's an option right there that says add to reusable blocks, second from the bottom. And so that creates a reusable block that adds something to the block inserter up here. And then when you're looking to insert a block, if you hover over it, it will give you a preview off to the right-hand side to show you exactly what you'd be inserting. So here we have a preview of an image block that I decided I wanted to be reusable. That's a picture of the Reynolds Coliseum scoreboard. Once you've created a reusable block, it can't be edited until it's converted back to a regular block, which again is something you can do with that three-dot menu. And so you might be wondering, why would I ever want to do this? So what's cool about reusable blocks is that you can take some piece of content you've created, some text or image or coming in the next release of Gutenberg, which I think will be tomorrow. Um, you can have collections of blocks that you can sort of bundle together as a single reusable block. And when you mark it as a reusable block, that means that you can insert it on any page or post that you want, and that any other user working in the same website can also insert it in any page or post that they want. So if you've got some sort of consistent message or branding that you want to appear on many pages or even every page, this is something that you can do to quickly create it and add it in as many places as you want. So, all of this is to say that in Gutenberg, blocks are where the magic happens. So, if you're just typing text, if that's mainly what you're doing, if that's mainly what you're concerned about, you honestly don't need to think about it. You can just type your text and then publish, and everything will work just the same way. If you want to do something different than that, if you're trying to do multi-column layouts or adding some sort of rich media or something like that, then you're going to want to get to know some of these blocks. And so I'm going to try to help you get to know them. So here's some everyday blocks, things that you're going to use over and over and over again, probably. Your paragraph block, which we've spent a lot of time on it with these screenshots. Your heading block. So when you're putting text uh, larger text above a section to denote this is the new section. Excuse me. When you're using lists, so the list block is both bullet points but also numbered lists. And then images. Um, when you're adding an image block, you're just adding some image, just like sort of classic WordPress going up to the media library and inserting something. And then once it's added, you have the option to make it float to the left, float to the right. You have size options, things like that. There's some other blocks that are definitely worth mentioning. So the classic block is something we'll see a little later in the presentation. It's basically the old editor, the classic editor, bundled into a single block. So if there's something in Gutenberg that you'd like to be able to do, but you can't figure out how to do it, but you know that you used to be able to do it in the old editor, one thing you can do is insert a classic block and use the tools that are available from the old editor right there for that block. Um, Generally speaking, I don't think you'll need this block very often, but it's a nice thing to have in your back pocket just in case you want to make some sort of special something that you know you knew how to do in the old editor and you'd like to do in the new editor. Uh, there's the shortcode block. So I mentioned shortcodes earlier, this sort of pseudo HTML with the square brackets. Um, if your website has lots of shortcodes, they will not stop working. So they will continue to work when you upgrade to the new editor. Um, and what will happen is they'll just exist as blocks in a shortcode block. Um, you have things like latest posts or button. These are two blocks that are examples of some of the things that people like to add to their pages that haven't always been easy to add in the past. So a button, for instance, is exactly what it sounds like. It's uh, something that you can click on that's a little bit bigger and styled a little differently than a regular link. And latest posts is going to dynamically pull in whatever the latest blog posts are and display that on the page. I'll also mention the spacer block, which lets you adjust the spacing up and down between different blocks. That's something that's handy if you're trying to get a page to look exactly the way you want it to look and you need just a little extra white space or something like that. The gallery block is a really neat feature for displaying images in this sort of mosaic display. Um, so WordPress has had a gallery feature for a long time, but it's always sort of been hidden and not really finished. And this is really, finishing it off and making it a really nice experience. The cover image is a way of sort of setting a big highlighted image with text over top, which we'll see an example of that in a little bit. And then the columns block I mentioned earlier, this is the ability to have multiple columns of content. And you'll notice that the icon here for the columns block hints at what it does, which is you have a block that then can contain other blocks inside of it. And then we have a few blocks that are worth forgetting. So they're there, but maybe just don't ever plan on using them. And I say probably because there are specific use cases where these blocks make sense. The first block is the video block. Um, this is different than what you do if you wanted, for instance, a YouTube video. For that, you'd go to the YouTube embed block. For the video block, that's looking to embed an actual like MP4 file, an actual video file. And generally on campus, we advise people to not just host those in the WordPress website. Instead, use a service like YouTube or the My Media site service that Delta runs, things like that. The code block is a block that will display code. It's not a block that will run code. So it's great for me if I wanted to write a blog post about some of the work that I'm doing as a web developer. It'll give me a nice and easy way of showing the code that I'm working on. But it's not got a lot of use beyond that. Similarly, the verse block, the verse block. So WordPress started its life as a blogging platform, and I guess there are a lot of poetry bloggers, a lot of people who will write poetry and post it to their website, which is really cool. But it's also not something that happens very often at a university, at least not for like a departmental website, for instance. Um, and so the verse block is it's like the paragraph block, but it respects any extra line breaks or anything like that. So in a paragraph block, when you hit enter, it will automatically start a new paragraph. In the verse block, when you hit enter, it'll just add extra lines within that same block. And then we have the pull quote and the quote blocks. So those blocks are they do slightly different things and they serve slightly different purposes, but it takes a little nuance to explain that. It has to do with sort of whether it's a quote in context in a story or whether it's a quote that you're sort of pulling out of the story to highlight as a visual element. Um, Either way, uh, most of the time you're not going to use these, and occasionally you might need to sort of decide which one you want to use, one or the other. Um, but hopefully, I'm kind of hoping that in future releases of Gutenberg, they either rename these or include some helper text to try to explain what specifically the difference is between full quote and quote, because it can be kind of confusing. So those are a bunch of blocks that hopefully you'll find to be useful. Right now, everything's very much in the abstract, and I promise you're going to get some hands-on experience in just a little bit. I do want to spend some time highlighting some of what we've learned in our user testing. So as I've been talking about, blocks make it a lot easier to do some really cool stuff, some complex page layouts and dynamic content, but it's a big shift. It's a lot different than what we're used to from the last 12 years of WordPress. And so with that in mind, our team started conducting user testing on campus with some folks we know who are regular WordPress users, um, regular WordPress users who we knew would be able to give us some really good feedback and help us develop our training materials. I wrote a blog post all about this, which is on our website. It's a long blog post, and I probably babbled on for a little longer than I needed to. But if you'd ever like to read that, the link is here in the slides. And then also I'll be sharing the slides out with everybody at the end of the presentation. But here are some of the things that we found. And so some of these screenshots are a little older from a previous version of Gutenberg. but I think in general you should be able to follow along. So the first thing is that no one knows what to call anything or where anything is. So I've talked about this little three-dot menu several times. Here it is appearing to the right-hand side instead of on top. Like I said, this is an earlier screenshot. Um, so one of the user tester, let me try that again. One of the people we did user testing with, uh, when he was trying to describe what he was doing was clicking on the three dots, and what he said was, so I clicked on the little mini hamburger options thing looking over here. And never in a million years would I have thought to call three vertical dots a mini hamburger. I guess I kind of see it, but so this is sort of where some of the vocabulary comes into play. Uh, Nobody really knows what to call these new features, and for the three dots, I've just been calling them three dots. Uh, Picking up on the food theme, some other people have been calling them a kebab menu, things like that. But uh, it's going to take a little time for us to all decide what things are called and sort of have a common vocabulary with each other. It's also not always clear when to choose which block. So for instance, I mentioned one moment. Sorry about that. Had to sneeze. Um, so uh, I mentioned earlier this issue with the video block versus the YouTube block, how on Canvas generally we would discourage you from using the video block. It's one of our blocks worth forgetting. Um, it's not really clear in the user interface that the video block would be something you wouldn't want to use. A lot of the user testers that we had trying to insert a YouTube video went straight for that video block because it makes a lot of sense. So there's going to be some time where we all have to develop some intuition about what different blocks do and when to do this block versus another block. The block settings in the right-hand sidebar were something that a lot of people just totally forgot about. And this sort of makes sense from sort of a history of WordPress perspective. Uh, what we're used to for the last 12 years is the right-hand sidebar being things like choosing your categories and tags, or doing things like choosing a parent page or something like that. All these things that you do after you've created your content when you go to publish the page. It's not something we're used to looking at when it's time to be working on the content and styling and things like that. So this is something that you should give yourself some time to get familiar with and gain some intuition about again. It's also not always clear when you need a new type of block or when you can just customize the block that you have. So here we have two screenshots of the same block. Both of these are paragraph blocks, but at the top, it's a paragraph block that's totally unstyled. We haven't done anything with it. And at the bottom is a paragraph block that uses all of these customization options to make it look very different, to make some text stand out and be really visible and prominent. Um, again, this is just something you gain with a little bit of experience. There's also this issue of when you need to use the toolbar at the top and when you need to use the right-hand sidebar, but also whether or not text needs to be highlighted. So, for instance, with the top toolbar, if you're going to make text bold, it makes sense to highlight the words that you want to be bold and then click on the B button. With the right-hand sidebar, you have these options like changing the font size, and those options apply to the entire block, not just to what you have selected for your text. So you can make all of a paragraph 28-point font, but you can make selected words in a paragraph bold or italicized, things like that. Um, that's sort of a new thing, and getting used to the idea that the toolbar formats and customizes in a way that's different than the right-hand sidebar. And the two things that we're going to just keep talking about over and over and over again, with training and support whenever you have a question, things like that. The two key takeaways are: number one, don't forget to look at the settings on the right because they do a lot of interesting things and people forget about them. And then number two, if there's something that you know you can do, but you're not finding a way to do it with the block that you're using, try a different block. There are a lot of blocks that are available. Um, we're actually building more blocks to give additional functionality, and so I guess WordPress is very forgiving. No matter what you do, you won't totally break a page. Uh, WordPress keeps a revision history, so we can always roll it back to something else, some previous version. And so it never hurts to experiment a little, to try a different block and see what happens. And then if that doesn't work, it's easy to remove that block and jump in with another one. So this is all very up in the air, abstract. Um, you know, on a hypothetical website, what does this look like? But you've probably been wondering what's actually going to happen to your website. And so hopefully we can give a little bit of insight into that. So I mentioned at the beginning that Gutenberg is available as a plugin that can be turned on for early adopters. After WordPress 5.0 is released, it will become the default page editing experience. Everybody will be upgraded automatically once you go to WordPress 5.0, but there is also a plugin called the Classic Editor plugin, which can be turned on after 5.0 is released, that will sort of hide Gutenberg and make the Classic Editor the main editor or just an option, things like that. If you're in this class and you don't have admin rights on your website, if you're just a regular content creator, the main thing to take away from this is to talk to whoever your web admin is and talk about what your options are for upgrading or not upgrading, delaying upgrading, things like that. So when Gutenberg is the new default editor, all of the content that you've created up to this point, every page and post in your website, will continue to work. Nothing will change for the end user who's just somebody out in the public visiting your website. And on the back end, when you go to edit the content, all of your content will still be there. What Gutenberg will do is take all of your content and put it all into a single classic block, classic editor block. So I mentioned earlier, the classic editor block is all of the tools from the old editor just bundled into a single block. And if you want, you can leave your content here like this forever. It will never go away. This block will always work. And there's not really any reason to make an immediate switch unless you want to use all of the tools and features that are available in the new editor. So for instance, if you have a blog post from 6 years ago that you're never really going to change, you never really have to worry about adding new content to it or making it a multi-column layout or something like that. You don't have to do anything to it. You can just leave it in the classic editor block and never really worry about it. But if you have, for instance, an about page and you want to sort of reformat things to be in a multi-column layout or add some of these new rich media experiences or things like that, when you go to edit that about page for the first time after upgrading, all of the content will be in this classic editor block, and you'll have to break it into new blocks to be able to take advantage of all of these new features. And so here's how you will do that. If you click on the little three-dot menu, which again is now at the right-hand end of the toolbar that appears at the top of the classic editor block, you'll see this option that's labeled Convert to Blocks. When you click Convert to Blocks, Gutenberg will look at the content and try to assign it to blocks that it recognizes. So if it sees a heading in the existing content in the classic block, it will map that to a heading block. If it sees text, it'll map that to a text block. If it sees an image, and so on. If it sees something that it doesn't know what to do with, so for instance, in the example here, uh, we have a couple of paragraphs, we have a bullet point list, and then at the bottom we have this embed that's a very custom embed. It's not something standard like YouTube. When Gutenberg transforms this page, it took all of the text, or all of the paragraphs rather, and mapped them to paragraph blocks. It took all of the bullet point items and mapped it to a list block. And then this thing that it wasn't familiar with, the special embed, on the right-hand side, you see it took that and put it into a standalone custom HTML block. If you're comfortable editing HTML, you can edit that. If you're not comfortable editing HTML, you can leave that alone. Either way, this is going to continue to work. So the excuse me, the custom HTML block is just the sort of um, chunk of code that can appear in the context of your other content. You can leave it alone. You can make edits, but otherwise, it's just this block in and of itself. Whenever Gutenberg doesn't recognize something. Sorry, I sort of lost my train of thought. I don't know if you could tell, and I sort of started babbling, but I'm back now. um, this is when having an audience would be useful, as I could see people looking at me like, "We get it. You can stop talking." So, uh, if the editor doesn't recognize something, then it will do a couple of different things. And we just saw one option is to dump it into an HTML block. One option would be to take that thing that it doesn't recognize and put it back into an old classic block. And then the last option is it's labeled as overwrite. Gutenberg will try to fix it, but basically Gutenberg will just delete anything that it doesn't know how to fix. I would discourage you from clicking the overwrite option. Convert to classic and edit as HTML block tends to be the way to go in my experience. But honestly, with the content that I've upgraded from classic to Gutenberg so far, I don't see this message very often. Gutenberg is actually pretty good at recognizing things and transitioning them really smoothly. So that's if you have content that's just in the sort of regular classic editor. So here I have that labeled as sort of vanilla WordPress, where you have sort of a simple website, not a lot of bells and whistles. That's maybe a little bit of a misnomer. What I mean really is when you have a website that is using the editor the way it's always been used. The process that you'll see is very much what I just went over just now. Um, when you have sites that use something more custom, whether it's shortcodes or shortcake powered shortcodes, advanced custom fields, page building plugins, these things that I talked about at the very beginning, the process is going to look a little bit different. So vanilla WordPress, as I said, should be a pretty smooth upgrade. You may run into some issues with some plugins breaking, especially old plugins that aren't really supported. That's something that your web administrator may need to worry about in a conversation with us if you run into any problems, or whoever your web support team might be. If you're using shortcake-powered shortcodes, or even just shortcodes in general, and if you have a website that was built by our team in OIT, this is something that we like to do a lot, or pre-Gutenberg we would like to do a lot. In the editor, in the classic editor, it might look something like this, where you have these shortcode previews. When you upgrade to Gutenberg, the same thing happens as before. So all of your content gets put into the classic editor block. The shortcode preview sort of renders, plus or minus a little bit. The styling gets a little wonky. And then when you click on the option to convert it to blocks, the shortcodes get dumped into these shortcode blocks, which I mentioned earlier. Everything will continue to work. You can leave it exactly like this, and your users out in the public will never know anything happened. The only downside is that these shortcodes uh, get converted into their raw code, their square brackets that we've been hiding behind these previews. Um, Again, you can just leave it like this, but we're also creating a set of blocks that are Canvas branded that will sort of be a successor set to some of these shortcodes that you've been using before. So that if you do want to convert it into something that's a little more pleasing in the editor, or also take advantage of some of the other features that are available, like reusable blocks and things like that, um, then you'll have that option with these other blocks that we're building. Those other blocks are still in testing. They're not quite ready for people to use, but I'm really excited about them, and I can't wait for people to have them available. If you have a website that uses advanced custom fields, it's a slightly different situation. So again, it might look something like this, where you have these modules where you're adding rows or content sections, um, and you never see sort of the classic look of the editor. Instead, it's inside of these little modules that you're adding. Um, the good news is those continue to work. So the same way that those were visible on the editor before, they're going to continue to be visible on the editor. You can keep adding rows or adding new modules. All of that will continue to work. But you also have all of this new editor stuff at the top of the page, these blocks and this content area that your old content doesn't get mapped to. And excuse me. And that's okay. Again, your end users won't see any difference. It just means that you're in a new editor, but you can't use any of the new editor's tools. So your web developer or web support team is going to have to do at least something to convert these old ACF powered uh, pieces of content into something new that works in this new editor. Um, that's not super difficult for a developer to do. It's something that is definitely a project, definitely something that will take a little bit of time, but it's not technically too difficult. It's just something that you'll need to work with your web support team to schedule out. So again, the key things with this kind of an editor, the front end won't break, but the editor might be a little bit more confusing because you have these two different regions, the part that works and the part that doesn't seem to work. Some themes may need some rewrites. I say completely rewritten here, that's an overstatement. Just some changes to how it processes the content and displays it for your users. And your experience will really depend on how ACF is integrated into your environment. If you're using these custom fields for everything, then that's going to take a little more effort than if you're just using them for a couple of small things. And then we got page building plugins. So the truth about page building plugins is we don't really know what's going to happen. And partly that's because there are just a lot of page building plugins or things out there. So some of the really popular ones are Divi, Beaver Builder, and Visual Composer. Those sound familiar to you, then that's the sort of thing we're talking about here. But there are other page building things out there that are just uh, different things. They're not always well supported. Um, Again, it's 12 years worth of people coming up with ideas for how to make the classic editor do more. And over the course of those 12 years, there have been just lots and lots of ideas. We don't really have a way of anticipating how every page building plugin is going to work with Gutenberg. And so our biggest recommendation is to find whoever built the page builder for you, reach out to them and find out what their plan is for the upgrade. And if they have a plan, that's fantastic. Stick with them. Make sure you have an up-to-date license if it's something that you're paying for. Make sure your plugin is at the latest version and just stick with it so long as that's still working for you. If they don't have a plan, if the company went out of business, or if they haven't been following along with all of these developments and they're totally unprepared for Gutenberg, um, that might be more of a problem, and you'll maybe want to reach out to OIT or somebody else on campus to try to come up with uh, a new plan for your website. That's not really helpful advice, except just to say communication is always good. You should talk to whoever your web administrators are, and they should talk to whoever their support team is. And we just need to make sure everybody is thinking about this and aware of what's going on. If you're just a content editor, if you don't have administrative privileges on your website to manage users and things like that, um, you're going to want to make sure you find whoever it is that does have those privileges and make sure that they have some sort of a plan for this. So that's your homework. Um, Again, I'll be sharing these slides out to people after the workshop is over. But take some time to look at the screenshots, see which thing that I showed you, your website, your editing experience now looks most like. Follow that advice. And if you're not sure, contact whoever your support team is. And if you don't have a good support team, feel free to come to us. Our team, OIT Design and Web Services, holds office hours every Friday morning in the Event Ferry Technology Center, except when there's a hurricane. We didn't do that last Friday. But you can always come talk to us, and if we don't have access to your website, we can't make any immediate changes, but we can give you general advice and help you sort of come up with a game plan. So, some other resources before we get into the hands-on part. um, there's the Gutenberg Handbook, which is still a work in progress. The broader WordPress team is still working on it. Um, the Gutenberg plugin, which your web administrator can install on your website, and you can experience it firsthand with your content. Just be careful. Don't go nuts and delete everything and redesign everything with what is still sort of an in development tool. A little caution is in order. Our team has been putting together some Gutenberg help documentation at go.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg. And then our team is also available for more things WordPress related at design.oit.ncsu.edu. So all of that said, you're probably waiting for a chance to actually use the editor. I've been talking and talking and talking for an hour. Now's your chance to stop listening to me and actually try this out. So we have two resources that are available on campus. First, a public sandbox. That's what I'm going to ask you to use right now. If you go to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg/quick in a new tab in your browser, you won't have to log in. Nothing you do will be saved, and you won't be able to publish and see what it would look like on the front end. Instead, it's just a public demo of the editor. You can change content. You can do anything you want in there. And then if you want something that's a little more robust, where you can see how things change from when you type it in to when you publish it to the front end, and where you want your changes saved, you can go to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg. And that one, you do have to log in, campus users only. Um, Save that one for later, create a website later. For right now, let's focus on just the public sandbox. So if you could go to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg/quick, and I will do that as well. Okay. So here's the editor that you've been seeing in screenshot form. Up here we have the page title, same as ever, just looks a little bit different. If you've ever changed the link, the permalink for your page or post, that used to be just below the title. Now it's just above the title, and it only appears when the title is in focus. So I can change that right there if I wanted to, but I'm not going to right now. As you hover over each block, you'll see this paragraph label right here. This is telling you what kind of a block that it is. So these are all paragraph blocks, but if I scroll down, here's an image block, and you'll see some other types of blocks further down. Here's a heading, and so on. You may also notice when you hover over certain areas, here's the that plus button. It's always present in the top right hand or left hand corner, but you'll also see it show up in other places when Gutenberg thinks now might be a good time for you to add a new block. That's where your mouse is. It seems like that might be what you're trying to do. If I click on a block, if I bring it into focus, the toolbar will appear across the top. So here, I mentioned before, this is the icon that represents this block, this paragraph icon. If I click on that, I can transform it into a different block type. So if I go ahead and change this to a list, now it's just a single bullet point of a bulleted list. And if I press enter, now it's another bullet point and another one, and so on. I can also change my list. So you'll notice the toolbar is different here than it used to be. I can change my list to a numbered list instead, and I can indent this item over to the right, for instance. In this three-button menu right here, you have all of these options for different for different things you can do. You can duplicate the block. So here's a copy of it, but I can also go ahead and make it a reusable block. I have to name my reusable block, so I'll call it Brian's block. And press save. And so now the content in this block cannot be changed. I can still change the content up here because this is a different block. This is a copy, or I had made a copy of this one. This one down here is static, unless I convert it back to a regular block. Now that it's a reusable block, go ahead and get rid of this message. Now that it's a reusable block, when I go to my block inserter tool and I go to reusable, I have a couple of blocks that are available that I can drop in whenever I want. So I can drop in another one of these, another one of these Brian's blocks, and I can move it, drag it and drop it, or use those little arrow buttons to move it wherever I want, or to use the same interface to insert it on any other poster or page. I think that's pretty cool. I hope you do too. A few things that I'd like to highlight. Let's see. So some blocks that I talked about. We have the image block. Again, the toolbar here is slightly different. Instead of having the option to make text bold or underlined or things like that, now you have alignment options for the image. Gutenberg supports left, center, and right align, but also supports what it calls wide width alignment and a full width alignment. And so just to show you what that will look like, if I'm aligning center, the image is kept within the regular content column of the text. If I make it wide width, then it breaks out to be a wider image. And if I make it full width, it will go all the way to the edge. And you'll see that that same behavior on the front end when you publish the page. It will break out of the sort of main content column and expand further to take up the whole width of the page if your theme has been prepared for Gutenberg to be able to support that. If you're not sure if your theme has been prepared, that's another conversation to have with your web support team. Here we have a heading, and so we have different heading levels. And so heading levels are very important for accessibility purposes. And actually, our team, along with OIT's accessibility coordinator, we teach periodically a WordPress accessibility workshop that I highly recommend for people. Excuse me. To talk about some of the important things that we do for accessibility in a web page and try to improve accessibility. So this is making sure that everything that's on the web page can be understood and interpreted by somebody with a disability, a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, and who might be using some sort of assistive technology. Like, so for instance, somebody who can't see might have screen reading software that reads all of the text on the page out to them. And when that software reads things out to them, and it encounters a heading like this, it will announce what the heading level is, and that tells the user something about what section they're in. And so when you have different heading levels, it's important not to skip heading levels because this is defining some structure of the page. So an H2 subsection within the H2 should really only be an H3. You shouldn't jump straight to an H6. So that's sort of a whirlwind introduction to accessibility. One of the neat things that Gutenberg does is it helps you do this better. So if I go up to this little eye icon here, this little information icon, it says content structure, and I click on that, it will give me information about my content. So the number of words, the number of headings, the number of paragraphs, the number of blocks. And then underneath it gives me a document outline. And my outline starts with the title, Meet Gutenberg, and then it tells me what the headings are beneath that title. So I have my H2 heading, which defines the section within the document, and then these H3 headings here. And actually, if I click on one of these, it will jump me straight to that block. So you notice when I clicked the H3 chapter 1, it put this block in focus. If I click on Pride and Prejudice, my H2, it puts Pride and Prejudice in focus. So what happens if I do skip my heading level and do something that's a bad accessibility practice? So I'll go ahead over here to the right-hand side and turn my heading 3 into a heading 6. You see that stylistically it's different, but also this changes the structure of the web page for somebody who's using assistive technology. And now when I go up to my content structure, it will highlight this heading and tell me this looks like an incorrect heading level. So this is a good check for you to be able to make sure you're doing right by all of your users, and it's a nice feature that's available for uh, uh, seeing the structure and navigating through your content if you've got a um, particularly large uh, uh, page or a post. So this sort of bothers me, so I'm going to make it an H3 again. Right here, my byline for Pride and Prejudice, this is just a paragraph block. It's got, you can see the little paragraph icon here, and when I hover over it, when it's not in focus, it labels as a paragraph. Over in the right-hand column, you have all of these options for formatting, including the custom size. So if I want to make it bigger, I can do just that. I think I already had it at a custom size, something like 24. Okay. And then you can also just type in a number here too. You don't have to just drag the little circle and be super careful about where it lands. There are also some predefined sizes that are options for you as well. And then beneath here, we have the color settings. So here I can choose a background color. So for instance, if I want a UNC blue background color, I don't know why you would ever do that, but if I want that, then I can select that right here. And then I can choose my text color. If I want red against that UNC blue, that's a aesthetically terrible choice, but maybe you want to do that. You can do exactly that. And then if you don't like those choices, you can click clear. So talking about accessibility earlier, one of the things that's important for accessibility is making sure that you have sufficient color contrast. For instance, if somebody is colorblind or just has limited vision and they have a hard time uh, seeing, uh, or rather distinguishing between text and background that are similar colors, then you have a message that will pop up that will keep you from doing something that's bad. So, for instance, let's say I make my background color this really light gray and I make my text color this slightly darker gray. This is really hard for somebody to read, and Gutenberg, the editor, will tell you that. It will pop up with this message that says this color combination may be hard for people to read. Try using a brighter background color and or a darker text color. Um, I'm going to just go ahead and remove my sort of medium gray color and just have black text on the gray background color. That's plenty easy to read. If you so uh, I lost my train of thought for a moment, but I'm back. So if you have these color options right here for a block, some blocks, as we start to roll out more tools to campus, instead of having all of these colors like pink and UNC blue, instead they're going to have the NC State brand colors. So that's a customization that we're able to do, and that will be available at the theme level or in certain plugins. And again, is something to talk to whoever your web team is. So with all of that, we've got about 15 minutes left in the workshop. I'm going to mute myself for about 5 minutes and get some water and give you about 5 minutes to spend trying the editor, trying different things. And I'm actually going to give you an example, a piece of example content that I'd like you to um, try to recreate on your own. Um, let's see. Yeah, so try to do something like this. So the image that you see right here of the puppy, I don't think is available in the demo environment, but you can choose your own image from the ones that are available. What's important here is you have an image with text over it with the sort of gray shading over the image. Beneath that, you have a list of the most recent posts that have been published, and that's being dynamically generated, so don't just type that yourself as a list. You have a heading, and then you have a YouTube embed. Try to think about what blocks might be able to do that. I'm going to go get some water. I'll be back in a couple of minutes, and then I'll show you how you can do some of these things. Oops. That's not what I meant to do. Let's go back. There we go. All right, now I'm really going to mute myself. Okay, so I'm back. Hopefully you've had some time to try to do something similar to this in the editor. So I'll go ahead and show you which blocks you would use. So let me go back to here. So we want first to have an image with text overlaid on top of it. So I'll go ahead and insert a block. I'll click on the block inserter tool here. And the block that you're looking for this is called the cover image. And I never actually remember where the cover image is. It's under common blocks and it's right here. And if you don't remember where to find it, you can start typing cover or even just type image and see what your image block options are and start guessing and trying. So we want to go with cover image. And I'll go ahead and select an image from the media library. Let's go with this image, somebody reading a book. All right, and I select. And again, you have these options in the top toolbar here. I want to make mine full width wide. And when I click on write title in the block right here, I have the option to type whatever I want. Here's some text. And I have my own sort of mini toolbar for formatting this text. So I'll go ahead and make my text bold and italicized. Over at the top here, we have alignment choices for the text. So I can align the text left, middle, or right. And then over to the right-hand side in the sidebar, I have a couple of options for the cover image. First is a fixed background. So this gives you an effect like this, where the image stays stationary while you scroll through the page. And again, that's an effect that would happen on the front end as well, or I can turn that off and have the image move with the page. And then finally, I have this background opacity. So this changes the tint on the overlay for the image. So at 0, I can see the image crystal clear, but this text may not have enough contrast with the background for users who have trouble reading it. This image is not too bad, but there are definitely some images where you might end up with white text on a nearly white background. So that's where the background opacity comes in. You can add some shading all the way up to 100, where you just have a big black rectangle. And that shading will give you the option to choose the right balance between readability and still being able to see the image. By default, it starts at 50%, and I find that 50% is usually pretty good. We also have this list of the most recent posts that have been published. And so we can do something like that. I'll go ahead and do it right here. In the block inserter, again, if you're not quite sure what to look for a block, maybe just start typing a word that sounds about right, like posts. And here we have latest posts. And that's the block that we want, so I'll go ahead and select it. On this demo site, we only have 2 posts published, Meet Gutenberg and some old post. But here are the toolbar options for this block. And then in the options that are in that 3-dot menu, and then the options that are over here in the right-hand sidebar. Those are options like ordering, whether I want oldest first or newest first. I can limit by category, and right now there's just the one category uncategorized, so that doesn't do a whole lot. And then the number of items I want to display, since I only have two posts, that doesn't do a whole lot either. I can turn on the post display date, or rather, I can turn on display post date. There we go. And that will insert the date that the post was published just beneath. Excuse me. And then finally, I have this YouTube video right here. So you may remember there are embed blocks. So if I go to this add block and go to the embeds section, and I can choose the service that I want to use. In this case, I want YouTube, and it says enter URL to embed here. And so I'll go out to YouTube and find a good video. Let's say NC State marching. Everybody loves the marching band. I didn't go to NC State, but I was in the marching band, so I have a soft spot in my heart for bands. So I was in my college's marching band. That was a little ambiguous. Anyway, so I copy the URL and I paste that into the embed field and click embed, and it embeds right there. Again, I have my toolbar options, and if I click this little edit button here, that will take me back to this view so I can change the video if I want to. So those are some examples of things you can do with blocks. Um, I I don't have any questions in the Q&A document. You've all been very quiet, so I will share these slides out to everybody who is registered for the class in an email in just a little bit. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can reach out to our group at OIT Design, all one word, at ncsu.edu. And you can email me directly if you'd like. When you respond to the email that I'm going to send out. And otherwise, I've been talking for about an hour and a half, so I'm a little tired. I'll hang around here for a few more minutes to see if anybody has any questions in the Q&A document. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and I hope this has been useful. I should mention before I go, I'll go ahead and present this again. So we do have linked from the Q&A document, and also on this last slide, we have an evaluation form. Go to nccu.edu/wp-eval. We do really rely on any feedback you can give us about the workshop, about information that you found useful, or something about our teaching style. If YouTube Live works for this sort of thing, things like that. So please give feedback if you have a chance. And again, thank you very much for listening.